Hello and welcome to a new episode of Name on the Trophy, the Manchester United podcast. We're back after another short break following the end of the season. And who'd have thought it? United are involved in a number of transfer stories, lots of speculation, and maybe a done deal on the way as well. My name's Dominic Booth. Delighted to be joined, as always, by Alex Wylie. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a while since we recorded the last podcast, and there's been a lot of players linked to United, but not a lot has actually been done. It's
Funny
kind of
that,
like
isn't
we're
it?
in Manchester United purgatory. So yeah, I'm good. Can't say so much for the club.
No, well, we've come to expect this by now. It's recording on the last day of June, the last day of David De Gea's contract, by the way, listeners. Whether that gets resolved by the time this podcast goes out or not seems very doubtful, seeing as though it's been left this long. But we will get into that later on in the pod. First of all, Alex, it looks like a done deal. We've had a Fabrizio Romano, here we go about this one. So it's definitely going to happen. Mason Mount joining Manchester United for £55 million plus what is believed to be 5 million in add-ons.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on this one? We've chatted about Mount before in the podcast. It's pretty much a deal that it's hard to think is a bad one. Really, it's pretty good for most people involved.
Yeah, I like the player and I like the profile. I like how he fits into the team. To be honest, I don't love the deal. I think 55 million, which could go up to 60 million for a player that's got 1 year left on his deal, seems extortionate, especially when you compare it to Kai Havertz, who came in for a lot of money, so will have a lot of money on the balance sheet as a cost. I think is the same age. I think they're both 24 and had 2 years left on his deal, and he's going for what, 60 to 65, not much more. It just seems a lot, especially as United already had Mason Mount pulling for them almost to a point in which he was happy to go for a free next summer. It just seems odd that we've still paid so much for the player. But I like the player, I just don't love the deal.
Yeah, I think that in terms of where the player fits in, we've spoken about it before. It's that Ericsson role with probably a little bit more energy and legs, someone who can get around the pitch next to Casemiro and a little bit further up, and someone who still has the vision and passing ability close to Ericsson's. I would say I do rate Mount's ability in that regard. I think he's probably quite underrated in that regard. People always go on about him about how he's a workhorse and box to box, and he is all of those things. But I think on his day he's actually a really fine footballer as well. And a year or two ago, the idea of Mason Mount leaving Chelsea for £55 million would have seemed pretty laughable. He's their
Mm.
player of the year twice, Champions League winner. He was an England regular until very recently. So he's had one bad season, and I know he's also had 1 year left on his contract before moving to United, which probably makes it seem more expensive than it should be. But United tax, English player tax, all that jazz. It is never going to happen for 20 million. This one.
The United tax makes grading deals that we do so difficult because every single one gets inflated like 20 or 30% more than other clubs. But yeah, like you said, he's not had the best season. To be fair, I don't think anyone at Chelsea's really had a great season. But even so, he's still in the top 7% for progressive passes, effectively attempting around 6 in a full match, which is still like elite. And if he's doing that on an off day, that leaves a lot of upside on a good day. What he's effectively going to give us is a younger, more mobile Ericsson, which is basically what you said. How Ericsson's gone from being a 10 to an 8 is what Mason Mount's almost doing, but just earlier on in his career. I think it makes a
Probably
lot of
more suited
sense.
to it than Ericsson, given his profile and his
Yes.
energy. And yeah,
Yeah. He is really hard working. I mean, for a attacking mid, he makes 2 tackles per 90, which puts him in the top 13% for like tens and wingers. For an 8, that puts him more around, I don't know, top 40%, but it's still significantly more than Ericsson, who does really nothing. And I imagine Ten Hag loves what Eriksen does on the ball, but probably thinks Casemiro at 30, 31 doesn't quite have the legs to run for an entire centre mid. So it does need someone alongside him who can chip in with defensive work and also help with ball progression. And to be honest, we don't really have anyone that does that. Fred's probably the closest, but his ball progressive numbers aren't great. And then you've got players like McTominay that don't really do either. So I do think we need him probably more than people realize. And I think it's one of those signings that in 6 months we're going to look back on and think as a player, like in terms of the player that we brought in, is a good one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can always argue about the fee when it's United. You know, the Anthony fee springs to mind as one that was
Mm.
massively inflated, but United got a good player, so who cares? Maybe that's up for debate. It's putting Fred's legs on Eriksen, though. That's what I like about this deal. It's a human transformer of a deal, putting those two players together, fusing them, which is what we've spoken about before.
Yeah, I mean Fred's tackle numbers are like top 1 or 2% for centre mids. I think it's like 4 tackles, just under 4 tackles, so almost double what Mason Mount is doing. People don't realize like he makes more tackles than Moises Caicedo. I'm sure we're going to speak about almost every other centre midfielder in the top 5 European leagues. He really does have like legs for days. It's just the other sides of his game which can be pretty unpredictable.
Man after my own heart. Moises Caicedo, you mentioned there. Funny you mentioned him because that aspect of this Mason Mount deal was an interesting one. For a few days, I thought we were going to be talking about United ditching a pursuit of Mount and going after Caicedo instead, because that's what came out in a few stories.
Mm.
Not really identical players to be choosing between in terms of a midfield profile. With United have done this before, of course, with Casemiro and De Jong a year ago, where they
Yeah.
pivot from a different type of player entirely. If they can't get their way with their top target, this seemed what my perspective on this. I think this was just a tactic to basically get Chelsea to sell Mount.
Mm.
Chelsea are holding out for something like 80 million, and United thought, well, let's go in for a player that Chelsea are trying to go after themselves, and then we'll pull out if you let us have Mount for a little bit less. That's how I saw it, which potentially forgives the flipping and flopping of between two different types of midfielder.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think United deliberately leaked that to put pressure on Chelsea. But I also think United, given the Casemiro and Frankie de Jong switch, it feels like United don't have a particularly structured way about working in the transfer market. Smart clubs have lists that they work down, and it feels like United have a player that they set their heart on and just throw everything at it. So it's Frankie de Jong last year, this year Mason Mount. And from a negotiating standpoint, that gives you nothing to work with because if the buying club raises the price and asks for silly money, you have no one else to go with and sort of play them off. And I thought it was telling that Caicedo was the next one that we sort of spoke about because Caicedo isn't remotely like Mason Mount. He's a six. He's someone who does a lot of defensive work, a lot of tackles, a lot of interceptions, doesn't progress the ball, but gets on the ball a lot, very tidy in possession, top 5% for a centre midfielder. He's not like Mason Mount whatsoever. So I don't understand how he's the next one on the list. And like you said, he probably wasn't. It was more of a tactic, but it was pretty telling that we didn't have a more realistic number two option that we could have leaked to the press, or even someone who's similar to Mason Mount that we had no interest in that we could leak to the press. It just smacks of a club that doesn't 100% plan when it goes into these windows.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's quite tiresome, really, because United sort of often make out they know what they're doing and that they've got these long lists of players. I remember when they signed Aaron Wan-Bissaka, they said that they had a list of 800 right backs that they'd
Yeah,
considered.
it's
I
just a
don't think
database.
is that just the number of right backs there are in world football. Like it just seems
Yeah.
absolutely ridiculous that you could be considering that. And it's not a boast to say that you know about all these players in football because you're a professional football club and that you should know about nearly everyone.
Well, it's
So
interesting. Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
no, I was just
carry
going
on.
to say about the type of player that Caicedo is. I wouldn't actually mind if United did go after a Caicedo type. I think he's
Mm.
a really good player, and potentially another issue for another podcast is that a defensive midfielder backup, a younger one, step into Casemiro's shoes, should really be on United's radar. I
Mm.
don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, there's definitely someone that needs to step in for Casemiro at certain points because, as I've said for the last year or so now, when you sign older players, this is the problem. They age, they get worse, they get injured more often, and they can't be relied upon. And I think United don't have another player in that mold. Although I spoke about Fred's defensive work, and I've said on previous podcasts, he's not a defensive midfielder. He sort of more presses from the front. United do need an understudy, but Caicedo's too a high profile to be an understudy. If you're
Yeah,
spending 50 to 100 million, where does he fit alongside the 70 million you just spent on Casemiro a year ago? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Really, what United need to do is get a young, I know Caicedo is young, but a young player with not so high a profile who's not going to demand first team minutes, but does have a lot of upside, who can be that number six. And just going back to what you were saying about before with United and their 800 right backs on the list, from what I gather, United have such an extensive scouting network that their database is populated via scout reports, not via actual just data provided from a third party supplier. And United have always taken a lot of pride in that. But to me, that's just too many cooks because you've got all this information, no one actually sifting through it. And because it's all mostly scout led, it's going to be loaded with all sorts of biases from those scouts. Really, you need, and I've spoken about it before, you need your scouts and you need your impartial data, and you need to have elite data scientists, elite scouts, and it needs to merge into a single process. United have never done that. They slowly seem to be doing it over the last 6 or so months. But yeah, I mean, really, the conclusion to it all is where's the cohesion? Where is the thinking? Where's the strategy? It just seems it's so frustrating. It really is so frustrating.
yeah, and it ties into the fact that there's a takeover process ongoing, and United don't even know what their situation is going to be with their owners in the next few weeks or months. So how can they be planning a transfer window and a budget? We've gone into that in great depth on other podcasts. So
Mm.
it doesn't surprise me anymore with United and planning. It's not been a great buzzword around the club for a decade. So um, we should probably move on. And we'll move on to another situation where there's also been a bit of a lack of planning with, as I say, we're recording this on the 30th of June, the last day of David De Gea's contract. It still hasn't been renewed, still hasn't been resolved. It hasn't been
Hmm.
said if he's leaving. He could end up leaving the club and then rejoining if, that's one possible scenario now. Um, and then there's interest in Andre Onana, which is, I think we both regard as quite encouraging news because we believe that he's an upgrade on De Gea. But United just don't know what they're doing in the goalkeeping department at the moment. Who is going to be the first choice keeper at the club next season? Pre-season, I think the pre-season tour is in like a week or two,
Yeah,
and United don't know who's wearing the number one shirt.
so strange. The whole De Gea thing was odd. I mean, so from what I gather, we offered him a contract on reduced terms, significantly reduced terms, and it had to be because he was on, he's the highest, not only the highest paid goalkeeper in the world, but the highest paid Spanish player as well. And he's not even in the national team. So, of course, it needed to be on reduced terms. De Gea accepted those terms and then went away for a holiday. We never signed the paperwork on the other side. We then withdrew the contract and gave him another contract on even more reduced terms. And obviously, he's not happy. And like you said, I don't think De Gea is the right person to go forward with. I think he's on the wane. I don't think he fits in with our style, but that is a terrible way to handle a player who's played for us for over a decade. I don't agree with that whatsoever. And yes, it speaks about a lack of planning, but it also speaks about a lack of integrity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Is this Ten Hag? Is this some people have put this down to ruthlessness on the part of Ten Hag, which I'm fully on board with, and I really thought this is something that Ten Hag should do, aping what sort of Pep Guardiola did a few years ago when he came in at City and basically binned Joe Hart and said, "I need to keep who plays with my feet."
Mm,
And De Gea is obviously not Ten Hag's man. It's become pretty obvious as soon as Ten Hag basically switched tactics after a few games into his tenure when De Gea tried to play out from the back and then was basically asked to do it slightly less because United got themselves into so much trouble at Brentford.
mm,
It became obvious at that point that De Gea and Ten Hag are not singing from the same hymn sheet. Now, I get all the stuff that you're saying about respect a player who's served United for a decade, who's won the league, who's won Player of the Year multiple times, Golden Glove, but this could be a sort of shift of ruthlessness from Ten Hag, which
mm.
turns out to be a major positive and reinforces his position. That's probably not what I think, but that's a devil's advocate way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, ruthlessness is usually coupled with decisiveness. They tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And the offering of De Gea a contract and then rescinding that offer and then giving him another one, that doesn't sound ruthless to me. That sounds like a club that's not actually sticking their flag in the ground and saying which way they want it. It's almost a club that's like, I don't know, maybe we'll keep you. We're not sure.
So lack of
But
communication between the club and Ten Hag. That seems like the most obvious thing.
I don't know. It could be. It could be. I mean, this could be on Ten Hag. Maybe he changed his mind right at the end of the season. I don't know. But for me, if you're going to be ruthless, it should have been communicated from the off that De Gea is not going to be the number one. I don't mind what Ten Hag did during the season, where he still spoke him up because we were in a position where we couldn't have anybody else. But then it should have just been get to the end of the season and just the drawbridge just go bang and you're gone.
Mm.
That's how it should have been played. That's ruthless. That would have been harsh, maybe, but it would have been ruthless. This kind of will we, won't we thing, I don't really know what to make of it. You know, like just make a decision either way. Is he going to be our number one or not? And move on.
Well, quite clearly not. I think it's whether he's going to stay at the club, and how long it takes to get a number one in, is the question. It weakens United's negotiating position when it comes to signing a new goalkeeper as well, because clubs probably will know that they're United are dilly and dallying, and they might desperately need a goalkeeper. I think I read the other day that Tom Heaton won't be allowed to leave yet because United are worried that they basically won't have any goalkeepers. I think Dean Henderson's come back from his holiday early to train, but he's been linked with a permanent move to Nottingham Forest. He might end up being the goalkeeper in pre-season. And all the while, there's this interesting Andre Onana, who we should probably talk about a little bit as well, Alex. Looks like a really good option to me.
Mhm.
Good with his hands, good with his feet, has worked with Ten Hag before, seems to have done really, really well at Inter,
Yeah.
and is available for a price which, in United terms, I think is fairly acceptable. I think around the 50 million mark.
Mhm.
I'd just say get it done, to be honest.
Yeah, this window, probably contrary to most United fans, I thought the most important position we needed to address was goalkeeper. Um, Mainly because De Gea doesn't fit in with the system that we want to play, and then that sort of permeates with the rest of the team. And you saw sort of post Brentford how that affects the entire way that we play. So having a goalkeeper who's comfortable with his feet is really important. And Onana is comfortable with his feet. He's comfortable coming outside the box. He's fairly aggressive in the air, and even as a shot stopper. So De Gea, throughout his entire career, has saved plus 0.07 post shot expected goals, which doesn't sound like much. He's effectively saving you a goal above average every 20 games, which is doesn't sound great, but is actually quite good for a goalkeeper. Onana's is plus 0.2, which is saving you a goal every 5 full games. That's very, very, very good. And I know part of that's been done in the Eredivisie, where obviously there aren't quite as good of finishers and it's easier, but it still speaks to a goalkeeper who is more or less the complete package. And he had a slight blip towards the end of his Ajax career, and then going into Inter due to, I think it was a drugs ban. I think he took something his wife was taking or something along those lines. And he had a blip in his career, but he's back now. And you saw in the Champions League final, really, really good goalkeeper. Would be a significant upgrade on De Gea. He's 27, so not too old for a goalkeeper. You still probably get a good 5 years out of him, I reckon. I'd be 50 million Onana. Yeah, I guess a big thumbs up from me.
Yeah, the only other one in the mixer seems to be Diogo Costa, a Portuguese goalkeeper. Those sort of David Raya links have gone away a little bit. Costa, another one who seems really highly rated. I don't actually know too much about him, but he's very young. I mean, 23. He seems to have been around for ages, but he's 23 and Champions League experience, Portugal first choice. Seems to be good with his feet from what I've seen, but maybe you can enlighten us a little bit more.
Yeah, no, he is good with his feet. He's a modern day goalkeeper. His shot stopping is plus 0.12, so saving you a goal every eight to 9 games, which is still very good. The only thing with Diogo Costa is there is a bit of a risk because he's young, because he hasn't played in the top 5 European league yet. I think he will be a very good goalkeeper. I just think Onana is the safer bet right now, and United need to make a safe bet. So from our Sabre scores, we should look at the stats for player and the effect it has on winning games. Onana is 82, potential 83. Costa is also an 82, but potential 87 because he's a bit younger. So I think Costa has a higher ceiling, but for me, United need to get this right. Like, it's very, very important for Ten Hag's reign to get this specific transfer right. And for me, you go with Onana based on all the information you have.
Yeah, you can't be having a season of maybes and who's the number one, and think back to the Fergie days when he was trying to find a successor to Peter Schmeichel. It took a number of years before we settled on Edwin van der Sar. We had all sorts in that period. We don't want another Taibbi this season, that's for sure.
Well, I saw some United fans likening Onana to Barthez because they'd seen some clips of him outside the box.
Running
But
outside the box.
I can assure you, he's if you're pardon the pun, a much pair of safer hands than Barthez.
Would have been a good pun that if you hadn't mangled it. He's 6'3" as well. I think Barthez is like 5'10" or something, which is
he's
very,
physically
very
imposing,
tall.
Onana.
Yeah,
he's not just tall as well. Like he's broad. He's a lot broader than De Gea.
Well, let's see what happens on that one. Yeah, by the time this podcast comes out, David De Gea might no longer be a Manchester United player. So keep your eyes out for that. What about another player who could become a Manchester United player whose links are getting very persistent, really? Rasmus Hojlund, Atalanta striker. It's a deal that I think United will probably get done. I'm not sure why we're seeing so many delays with this one. He's 20. Not a player that United really should be looking to make their first choice number 9. I think everyone agrees on that, but seems to have huge potential, and someone that United should just get through the door as quickly as they can, in my opinion.
I think the delays, the price, and how that works within the FFP restraints that we have. I agree. He's the guy that should be the understudy to whoever we bring as the main striker. And if we got that done for 30 odd million, 40 million, I'd probably be happy with it. But the prices that are getting mentioned, 60 million plus.
That puts him in a different category, doesn't it? That puts him in, you're the main man for the number 9 role. And that's really not what United should be doing.
No, and he shouldn't be the main man. Like I like him. I think he's got a lot of upside. But at the end of the day, he's only been in Serie A for a year. He was in the Austrian Bundesliga at Sturm Graz, I think, for a couple of years before that. And his outputs there were all right, like 1 in 3 in the Austrian Bundesliga. Now, he was granted very young. He was a teenager. But that doesn't translate into being the starting striker a top club in a couple of years. It doesn't. So, like I said before, I think if he's coming in to be the understudy and get, I don't know, 2,000 minutes a season, I'm happy with that. But to be our main man at 60, 70 million, I'm not having that. I think that would be a bad deal.
What sort of profile would United be getting from Hojlund? 6'1", so tall enough, and
Mhm.
seems like enough of a presence. His goal record, like you say, is not absolutely outstanding. Is it just that sort of focal point, deluxe Weghorst, I might be saying, or will he offer something a little bit more fluid in the channels, such as a Martial or a Rashford when they've played in that role?
He's kind of a combination of both because he is physically imposing. He's strong. He's quite tall. I think, how tall do you say? 6'1",
Six
I
one,
think.
yeah.
Yeah. But he's more dynamic than Weghorst. He likes to dribble.
Who isn't?
He's surprisingly quick given his size and stature. But I think he's a traditional number 9 in that his main job is to score goals. He's for a striker, he's like 50th percentile for assisting players, but for a goal scorer is pushing the 60 or 70s. He is more of a traditional 9. He's physical, he's dynamic, but again, to me, he just isn't quite at the level to be the number 1 striker at United. Nor is, I don't know if we're going to speak about it, I don't think Kolo Muani is also quite at the level to be a starting striker for United. A lot of the names we've been linked with, I don't think are good enough, to be honest. Only Harry Kane, and we pulled out of that 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I wasn't convinced when I read those stories about United pulling out of the Harry Kane race. I'm even less convinced now that I see Bayern Munich bidding for him. I just think that United are in a situation where they can't commit to a summer long pursuit of a high profile player like Harry Kane and all the noise that comes with it at this point in their lifespan, if you know what I mean, with the takeover and FFP, the budget. We don't know anything in terms of how much United can spend. I think UEFA
No.
have just put the lid on amortization, cutting that loophole in their transfer regulations that will allow clubs to spread the cost of a transfer over a contract. They've just
Mhm.
they've just brought that in, which will limit what clubs can do and make financial fair play even tougher. So United committing to Harry Kane, you know, it'll be an absolute circus that will go alongside the takeover circus, which is already going on.
Mm.
So I understand it completely, and I don't believe that the interest in Kane is completely gone. It might just be a case of seeing what happens and yeah, suck it and see. Basically, if he ends up going to Bayern Munich, I think I wouldn't be surprised. But if United aren't in for Kane or Victor Osimhen, and like you say, the likes of Kolo Muani and Hojlund, who have been linked with, aren't that first choice striker, then it leaves them in a position where they don't get the top priority in the eyes of many fans this summer, and that's seriously problematic.
Yeah, I don't get United this window at all. I don't fully know what the restraints are going into this window. We've spoken a couple of podcasts ago that it was reportedly 100 million, and I think that was talking about just the amount of we can spend on fees in this window. I just cannot see how, even with player sales, you can stretch that to 2 strikers, Mason Mount, and a goalkeeper. There's just no way that's going to work unless they've got significantly more money to play with than they're letting on. Um, Kolo Muani, I don't think is good enough to be starting. Hojlund, I don't think is good enough to be starting. There are other strikers on the market who are fairly young and maybe wouldn't even be that expensive that we don't seem to be remotely interested in. You know, Lois Openda, a guy at Lens, has been linked with Leipzig for about 30, 35 million. His expected goals and goal scoring rate is double what Kolo Muani's was about a year ago. And he's younger than Kolo Muani was at that point. And we don't, no one seems to be linking this guy to elite clubs. And then Leipzig is going to swan in. They're going to bring him in for a decent fee. And guess what? He'll be moving for God knows how much money in a couple of years. baffles me that United don't seem to even be aware of that. And maybe they are, but that's what it feels like from the outside.
Yeah, it's hard to decide whether United don't have knowledge of these players and that their recruitment and scouting is not up to scratch, which we all suspect is the case. But it's hard to decide between that or whether they're just being rightfully choosy and having high standards over the caliber of player that they should bring in. Because everyone knows that being number 9 for Manchester United is possibly it might be the hardest position to recruit in the world, bar Real Madrid signing a similar player. So it's understandable that a lot of players get dismissed and are not up to scratch. But then you have a situation where Rasmus Hojlund might be United's only striker signing of the summer. So those two things don't marry up.
No, I agree. I think you should have a high standard. I think Lois Openda is good enough. But then if you do have a high standard, how are players like Hoyland and Koulibaly getting in? That's where I'm a bit like, I don't quite get that. Neither of them, from a stats perspective, are blowing the doors off. They're not like Osimhen, who's like tearing everything down and scoring nearly a goal a game. They're scoring like 1 and 2, or probably less than 1 and 2 in Serie A and the Bundesliga. Koulibaly's 20, 23, 24. Yeah, I think he's 24, so he's not super young either. And I know he's played for France, which probably bolsters his profile, but I just find it odd that those two players are getting in and then someone like Lois Openda isn't.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
don't understand it. It all points towards an absolutely mad supermarket sweep in the last week of the window once the takeover is done and there's finally some clarity on the transfer budget. That I've just got premonitions of that happening towards the end of August, and we're doing a podcast a day then because of how quickly the speculation comes out and how the links are popping up in the media, because it has actually been pretty quiet in terms of media links. I mean, even by United standards, that is, it's been quiet.
Yeah.
You would expect a lot more stories to be coming out. Maybe it's because the Harry Kane thing has died down and there doesn't seem to be a big striker story doing the rounds at the minute. Yeah, it's really odd. It seems like takeover or bust, and if the Glazers cling on until September the 1st or something, then United are in trouble.
So a lot of people have spoken about how new owners will change the budget, and I think they will in the long term. Of course they will. But for this window, I think we have quite significant FFP restrictions. So regardless of whether the Qataris or Jim Ratcliffe come in, unless this is just a hole in my understanding, I don't see how that actually affects the window. I think people hear about the Qataris and they'll think, oh, there'll be this endless wealth of money. And there will be, but they won't be able to put it into the club right away.
Not straight away, no.
I just don't. I'm not sure if there's like a hole in my understanding, and I'm missing some sort of crucial bit of information that everybody else seems to be no. But I don't see how a new owner actually changes anything for this window.
No, I think the player sales might come into it. Whether United can recoup some money for the likes of Harry Maguire, who's genuinely been linked with some fairly big spending Premier League clubs, likes of West Ham and Spurs. Fred has been linked with Fulham and McTominay, Newcastle. Essentially 100 million plus worth of sales there. So that does definitely come into it, as well as budgetary restraints in FFP. So I'll be interested to see that. We'll probably do another podcast on sales if there are any in the next few weeks. So yeah, it's a cautious start to the summer for both for the podcast and for United.
Yeah, I'm so interested to get to the end of this window and actually see what we do, because at the moment I have no idea. I don't know where the money's coming from. I don't know who we're actually prioritizing. We've not even spoke about it on the pod, but there's been loads of right-sided centre backs that we've been quite seriously linked with, which again, we've already got 3 right-sided centre backs. We've only got 1 left-sided. I don't get it. Like, are we playing a back 3 next season? Is that what's happening?
Even the right-sided centre-backs aren't coming to United. The Kim Min-jae is going to Bayern Munich. So he was the top linked right-sided centre-back. We got
and he's a good
Torres
player.
going to Aston Villa. I know he's not right-sided, but he's a player United have been interested in and often been linked with. He's going to Aston Villa. Timber seems to be going to Arsenal, who United have been linked with. So, chaos at the minute.
Yeah, it's chaos, but and I don't mind these players going elsewhere. I mean, the two right-sided centre backs, Timber and Kim Min Jae. I never understood why United were in like even interested in those players. Pau Torres, that would have been a nice one to get in just because he's a left-sided player.
He was never going to be second choice to Lisandro Martinez, though. Really,
exactly. And again, where would Kim Min Jae fit in if you've got Varane there? Is that Varane out? And then what about Lindelof? And then what about Harry Maguire? It's just like I don't know. There's just no planning. Like who is planning this? Like these are very easy things to like work out. How many right-sided centre backs do we have? 3. All right, why are we looking at another one? I don't get it.
FAO John Murta. I think this podcast needs to be going into his inbox. I'm sure he's not listening, but if only he was.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just because United drum up so much media hype that we get linked with a lot of players that we're actually not really interested in. We might be like on our scouting list, but not really anything concrete. And maybe that's the reason for it. But
yeah, that does definitely happen with United. But it would be nice to see some coherent links that make sense, and some deals that happen quickly and that don't have to go through this massive circus every time. Mount for United standards has been relatively quick and efficient. I know a lot of people are probably frustrated it's taken a while, but this has been good. So that's the standard.
yeah, it's weird, I mean, so the bidding process with Mason Mount, I mean, that happens all the time when players negotiate, where clubs negotiate for players. But with United, it's like every single detail is broadcast to the wide public, and it really doesn't help the club.
It fuels impatience among fans, doesn't it? Because they see so much about them, about every, like you say, cough and splutter of the story, and they think, right, well, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. There we go. It's par for the course, and we're in for a good ride, I think, in the next couple of months.
Yeah, it will be interesting. I have no idea which way it's going to go.
Yeah, well, we'll cover it all as it happens on the podcast. That's pretty much all we've got time for in today's episode. Alex, thanks very much for coming back on and relaunching this first transfer. I think we might call these transfer specials over the next few weeks, just to add to that transfer hype.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I can't wait to start getting these out on a more consistent basis because stats and transfer rumors, it's like a hand in a glove. They go very well together.
When the done deals keep rolling in, we'll be there. Don't you worry about that, listeners. Cool. Thanks for listening. You can find us in all the usual podcast places. Keep liking and subscribing, and we'll be back again very soon.